All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Bill Wingle. I'm out of Region 3. I've been riding with NATRC now for about 12 years. I'm what a lot of you call a horse husband. My wife started this and dragged me into it, and I've been enjoying it and kind of picking up on it. But my interests are less in the competition and more in taking photographs and helping with maps and doing various other odd things that aren't necessarily competition related. That beside, I still don't mind doing well when I ride and doing well in the ribboning. So what we're going to talk about today is using NATRC maps. It sounds really simple, really stupid, but it's the map that you're given is one of the most important things you can have. It tells you where you're going. It tells you when you need to be places. It helps you stay on trail on time. A lot of this conversation is going to be pretty basic. It's more targeted. This talk's more targeted for people who are new to NATRC and are looking for their first competition, or they've done a couple competitions and they are still trying to figure out the logistics and how to make it work for them. So what we're going to do is, what we're going to learn about today is how to use the NATRC ride map. It really is more than just a map. And I'll get into the details. I'm going to talk about the components of a NATRC map. I'm going to talk about how to stay on the right trail at the right time. That sounds silly, but it's a common mistake for people to head off in the wrong direction. They're on trail, it's just not the right trail, the trail they're supposed to be on at that point in time. I'm going to talk about how to stay on time when you're on trail, how to pace, how to look at the map, know that you're moving along at the appropriate pace. When things start to go wrong, know when you have to make up time. Actually, and then other times when it's appropriate to lose time, when it's appropriate to fall behind because you're coming up to a PNR and you want your horse to rest, or various other things like that. I'll talk about some timing and pacing tricks. I'll mention GPSs very briefly. I have another talk where I've get into GPSs. We have that online in an earlier webinar. If you have questions about using GPSs, feel free to email me or call me and we can figure some of that out. I'm not going to get into today about real map basics, how to align your map with north. I will give you some ideas on how to align it for when the judges stop you and say, where's north, where's east, where's west, that kind of thing. I'm not going to teach you how to look at a contour map and identify different structures by looking out and pointing out a mountain and then pointing on your map. That's kind of a different kind of thing and not what we're really interested in here. And just very generally, I'm going to show you how to use the map to get around, but not to truly navigate with. I'm also not going to get into any detail about using a GPS. What is the NATRC map? Basically, it shows you what the trails are and what the points of interest are on the trail. Basically, what the timing points are. Where do you need to be when? It shows you various locations. It shows you ideally the time and distance between the different points. How many miles out on the trail is it? What time do you need to be there? Some of the maps will also say something about pace, and if they don't say it specifically, you can use a little bit of basic math and figure out what the pace between, what average pace you need to maintain between a couple points is. This is important because when you're going down the trail, if it's 4 miles to the next location, you need to know how quickly you need to be there. If you need to be going 3 miles an hour, you know you have about 1 hour and 20 minutes. If you need to do it at 6 miles an hour because you're an open rider, you got about 40 minutes to get there, and you don't want to fall behind. Getting there early is less important in a lot of ways than getting there really late. I'll also talk a little bit about when things go wrong, what a map can help you do. Basically, when things go wrong, it can help you recover from your error. And in a worst case, if something's wrong, if you or your horse get injured and you need to pull from the ride, it may help you find the quickest location to a place where you can get yourself rescued. There are some things that kind of go unstated with NATRC maps that it helps if you know in advance. And the timing, when you look at the timing, they're going to say you have a P&R coming up, and the timing for the P&R and things like lunch is built into the timing tables. It's not always explicitly spelled out. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. But know that you have 15 minutes for a P&R. 10 minutes, you're just going to be there standing, waiting for the P&R, your horse to calm down, and waiting for the P&R team to take your P&R. After that, you have 5 minutes where they're going to do the actual P&R, and you have a few minutes to get water, you need to get mount, and then you need to get down the trail. Even though they say a P&R takes 10 minutes and they give you 15 minutes, don't count on this as a point on the trail where you're going to make up any time. Usually you're going to burn through basically all that 15 minutes. When they mark lunch on the trail, and they'll tell you this in briefing, but usually they'll give you 45 minutes. They can give you longer, but it's going to be 45 minutes or an hour and something like that. This is a side note. For those of you who are really new, this may not make much sense, but I'm going to mention it anyway at this point. But if you're going down the trail and you get slowed down by a judge at an obstacle, that time is on you. You don't get to take a hold time. It's going to be holding you up. On the other hand, if you come up to a trail challenge and you have to wait in line, make sure you look down at your watch and note what time it is. And when you come up to the judges and you're about to start the obstacle, that's when you want to say that I've been waiting here for 5 minutes, and they will credit you with that time on your time for going down the trail. Note that once you get through the obstacle, if you have 2 friends following you, your waiting for your friends is on your own time. You do not get to claim how long they wait as your hold time. Just something to keep in mind. All right, now we're going to get to what's actually on a map. I drew this map over here on the right because this technically is a legal map. They do not have to be to scale. There are a few things that have to be on there. They have to indicate the trail. It doesn't have to be to scale. They have to show various checkpoints. You have to have at least 4 checkpoints on the trail. You must show camp. You must show either the time or the distance at each point. Here I just decided to show the time at each point, and in some regions they'll say that you're going to go out and you're going to ride the entire ride at 4 miles an hour. With that information, you can figure out what the distances are and everything else. Most people are making maps with a little bit more information on it than this at this point in time. You also have to show the 2 mile point, or in the new leisure class, it may be marked as the 1 mile point. This may be a true 2 mile, or it may be something just close. It also needs to indicate the color of the ribbon that you need to follow. Out in Region 3, most of our novice and CP riders are going to be following pink ribbons. Our open riders are going to be following pink or pink and blue, depending where they are on the trail. You get to other regions where they're on trails that are permanently marked, and they might have an orange loop and a green loop and various things like that. And that'll be indicated on the map in one form or another. And the color on the map may not really indicate the ribbon color, but you'll be told what that color indicates. The final thing that has to be on the map is the final ride time, which will be your minimum and maximum time. I will go into this map just briefly. It's a 16-mile loop, and you can kind of figure that out by the pace and the time. The mean ride time for this ride is 4.5 hours, but I have 2 P&Rs, so they each take 15 minutes. So my total ride time is 4 hours. If I'm going 4 miles an hour, that tells me I'm going 16 miles an hour. I'm going through the math of this, not to kind of confuse anybody, but this is the kind of thing I'm always out doing on the trail, is if I leave camp and I need to be out at point 1 in an hour and I'm going 4 miles an hour, that tells me this is a 4 mile, I'm going to be covering 4 miles in the first hour. This next instruction here tells me that there's going to be a P&R somewhere between point 1 and point 2. They're not required to say where the P&R is, on any map I do, I will show where the PNRs are. I kind of consider it fair because people who've done the ride before usually do know where the PNRs are going to be. They can only be in certain locations from a practical point of view. I don't see any reason to hide the locations. But in this next section here, I know that this next section is also going to take an hour, but there's a 15-minute PNR in there. So really my ride time is only 45 minutes. So I know this next section here is 3 miles. And I can go ahead and do that same kind of logic for the rest of the trail. This is just kind of how my mind is working when I'm running down the trail. If you have questions during any of this, you can throw them up, you can type them into the text. Sarah is kind of watching the questions for me. I'll try to answer them at convenient points as I go along, and we'll work through it. So this is a real basic map, and I actually kind of threw this up because early in my writing days with NATRC, I actually saw one map that looked a little bit too much like this, and I'm glad we don't have those anymore. This is more what a map that I create looks like for a Region 3 map. A lot more detail on it. There's a lot of information here. It's a little bit confusing at first, but once you start to get a hang of it, it all starts to make sense, and it tells you what you need to know. So on the map, I've got different trails. I have this red trail, which is my novice CP trail. I have these blue trails here. This indicates where open is going to be going during the day. They also share some of this red trail, and in briefing, I would discuss exactly the details of that. I also have some other things on here. I like to show roadways. There are other trails in this particular area, and I like to put those on the map too. So when you come up to a trail, if you look at your map and say you come up to point C and you come up to point C and you say, well, there's a trail running off to the left and a trail running on the right, where do I go? If the ribbons have been pulled down for some reason or you're not seeing them, it's like, oh, the map is telling me I need to go to the right. And so I'll go off to the right, and you can have a fair level of confidence, even if for some reason the ribbons are missing, that that is the direction you should be going. So on this map, I've got lots of checkpoints, lots of timing points. We have the 2 mile indicated on the map. I've got PNR locations. I have a PNR location here, PNR location here. We have lunch out on the trail, all sorts of things. I have timing tables for both open and for novice. Sometimes these will be on the back of the map. Every region has a very different looking feel to their maps. More and more are becoming GPS based, and with good background maps, which is really good. At the same time, just because they're not using GPS tracks and not putting them on topo maps or satellite maps doesn't mean that they're not very good maps. One of the maps I wrote a few years ago was at Bell Cow. I think that's in Oklahoma. It's more or less a hand-drawn map, and it's not the scale. And honestly, when I GPSed it later, it was far easier to navigate using this hand-drawn map than the actual GPS map, because it highlighted, the hand-drawn map highlighted where the loops were. There really wasn't anywhere else to go, but the nature of the map made it, the hand-drawn map made it very easy to use. We got the timing tables. On here, we'll show which direction you need to go. I have various arrows. Ideally, a map should have a scale. That's if it's drawn to scale. So I can look at this and say, okay, that total bar is about 2 miles. If I'm going from camp down here to A, as the crow flies, it's a little bit more than 2 miles. But with all these twists and turns, it's probably significantly longer than that. If we go to the timing table, it's actually about 4 miles. So it's on a straight trail. It kind of gives you a pretty good idea. In twists and turns, it gives you an idea, but you may need to fudge it a little bit. I've got a north arrow, so if you're using a map or a compass, you can figure out where things are. Traditionally, people are always putting north to the top of the map. That's by convention, it's not required, but it certainly helps when people do that. It helps if people put contact information on there. So if you get lost, if you have trouble, if you get hurt, you can call the ride manager, you can call the ride secretary. Often you will be given phone numbers for your safety riders. So if they're lagging behind and you can call them and you have cell service, they can quickly come up and catch up with you. Some maps will go into detail with written directions on the back, saying when you come up to a particular intersection, look for the rock, make sure you take a right, you're gonna go about 100 feet and take a trail that's kind of hiding in the woods. And some of those more detailed written instructions can be very helpful, as opposed to a fairly large scale map where if you have to go 100 feet and then find a kind of hidden trail, you're not going to see that with just by looking at the map. There can be lots of other trail information. As I said, I have Forest Service roads on here, other trails. I also indicate trails that are being used on a different day. This, in Region 3, we tend to use the same ribbons colors for both days. And so if you were riding up this trail here, you get up to this point J here, and you would see pink ribbons running off to the northwest, and you'd see pink ribbons running to the south. This tells you when you get here to pull out your map, look at your map, and say, oh, I'm supposed to be going south. That pink ribbon going off to the north is something else, and I get to ignore that. Okay. I've kind of alluded to a lot of this. Different colors tend to imply different divisions. I tend to indicate with my, one, I'm looking for a little bit of contrast, but two, the colors of the trails indicate the ribbon color. For this particular trail, I use pink ribbons followed along the red. The open riders would follow in blue and pink. I was also running a leisure ride here, which were on pink and green ribbons. And so anytime you were out in these different sections, it gave you a pretty good idea of what color ribbon to be looking for. I also indicate the direction. I have signs out on the trail, but if you're going in between a section, if you know you're heading out of camp and you're heading down the hill, you can look at your map and say, yeah, I'm going the right direction. People too often will get to an intersection, they're not paying attention. Like at this intersection here, they might see the pink ribbon off to the left and not notice the one off to the right, and then they start riding the trail backwards. And so if you look down at your map a little bit later on and you see arrows going the opposite direction that you are, it gives you a good idea that maybe you've made a mistake and you need to turn around. Checkpoints. These are key points of interest. They need to be marked on the map. I usually use the same checkpoint names both Saturday and Sunday, just so people kind of get used to them. So we have A, B, C, D out here. And if we look at the timing table up here, we'll see Camp A. I may not have every point on the table, but I'll have signs out here. But it's like if I need to get to A, I look at my timing table, I see a distance. I need to know I need to get to C. And then I'm looking for point E, which may be farther down the trail, that kind of thing. Again, you have to have at least 4 timing points on the trail. You have to have camp. If you have lunch, it needs to be marked. The 1 or 2 mile needs to be marked. You can have many other points. Just by convention, I don't like to have people go more than about 4 miles without some kind of timing point. It just kind of makes people feel better if it helps them know that they're on trail. And if you don't go too long, they can check their time and know that they're doing well or not so well on time. The map timing table. This is about as complicated as a timing table as you're going to see. Most people don't put this much information on a map. I have significant points of interest in the first column. I'll then say the only technical requirement to have on a map is the name of the different points of interest, and either a time that you need to be there or a distance that you need to be there. If you only supply one, and this is sometimes I've seen happen out east, is they will have a constant pace for the entire ride. If you're like a novice CP rider, they're going to say ride it at 4 miles an hour. If you're an open rider, they might say ride it at 5 miles an hour, or 6 miles an hour. And then you can quickly do the math. If they give you the distance, it's easy enough to figure out the time. If they give you the time, you can figure out the distance. I kind of spell it all out. In Region 3, we're very mountainous, and different segments may need to be traversed at very different paces. If I'm taking up a steep rocky hill, that's very different than if we're out in the flats and you really get to trot out and get moving. So on my maps, I'll tend to say, here's the total distance. Here's the interval distance between each of these timing points, your time to each location. So if at lunch, I know that I need to be there at a ride time of 2:52. On this one, it tells me that I'm going to be there for 45 minutes and that I should be expecting to leave at a ride time of about 3:37. Again, with times, I'll have interval distances, and then I'll tell you what the miles per hour are for each segment. The other key thing to know is the time back to camp for this particular ride is 7 hours and 27 minutes. I can arrive 15 minutes earlier at 7:12 or 15 minutes later at 7:42. So that'd be the total ride time. We have a couple PNRs out there and lunchtime. We will kind of scoot on. I'm not going to go into the real nitty-gritty detail on that map. Other things we've talked about is scale, north arrow, contact information. I won't go back over that. Even before a ride starts, it's normally you'll get when you check in or at briefing the night before, you'll be handed the map. And before I go out on trail, I like to annotate the map myself. All the information is already on the map, but I go an extra step, and part of this is, so before I get out on trail, I know what the distances are going to be out on the trail. I know that when I get to a particular point, I'm going to be taking a right, I'm going to be taking a left. If I get out to a particular point, I know that the group I'm riding with, and that I say I'm riding with, on this map, I'm riding novice CP. I know when I get out to this point X, I'm going to be taking a left. If I see some open riders ahead of me taking a right, I know that I'm not supposed to go chasing after them. And so it kind of, if I have a feel for the map beforehand, when I get on the trail, I have fewer surprises out on the trail. Other things I will do, even if the information is not on the map, here we'll see a timing table where we have mileage time and interval time, but we don't have a pace written down. And what I like to do on these maps is go through, mark when I'm supposed to be at a point and how far it is. So this point A is 3.9 miles out. I'm supposed to be there in an hour. That's real easy math. That means I need to average 3.9 miles an hour out on this section of trail. I do that for each of these sections, and you'll get out to, and I've ridden this trail before, and so I have a pretty good idea kind of what's going on out there and what the pace is. And when I saw this map, it's like, okay, I'm going 4 miles an hour, roughly 4.5 miles an hour, 4 miles an hour, 3.5 miles an hour. It's through some twisty trees. Slow down to 3.3 miles an hour. This is kind of rough terrain, sandy wash, climbing up a hill. And then I see this next section going into lunch at 4.6 miles an hour. And I know this section here is about as rough as this section back here. And it makes me think makes me check my math, one, and two, it makes me check to make sure I've got my PNRs in the right location and that they've been calculated correctly. Sometimes, as hard as people try, the trail masters try, is they do make mistakes, and they miscalculate the timing a little bit. And you can go up to the trail master and say, is this correct? Often they'll say it is correct. Or it's like, yeah, maybe that isn't quite right, but pay attention when you're out there, and if it's a real problem, we'll deal with it. It's, in theory, they can deal with it. But what it told me is this section of trail here was timed really slow. This section of trail was timed really fast. Then I noticed this next section here was timed really slow. This section should have been timed a little bit slow, but maybe not that slow. So what it told me is when I'm out on the trail is when I get to this point in the slow section is maybe I want to keep the pace up a little bit. I do know that I'm going to be coming into a P&R at this location, so I don't want to push it too hard. I don't need to run my horse into the ground before we're going to be doing a pulse and respiration. But I do want to maybe not go as slow as indicated. That way, when I have to get to this fast section, maybe I've made a little bit of extra time here, and I can take this section a little bit slower, or I'll still push fairly hard, but if I lose a little bit of time, not a big deal. I may have gained a few minutes on this last section by going a little faster, and then on this next section, I know it's time slow, and anywhere I can, I'll just try to make up a little bit more time, and I'll get myself back on pace. I know I'm mixing in here a lot of things of how to read the map and my logic of going down the trail, and they're just all kind of interweaved. I've got a couple questions that people have asked. I'm going to take a quick look at them. First one is, I know you can get time penalties at the very end, but can there be penalties for not doing the segments at the estimated time on the map? For example, can a judge leave an obstacle area if you haven't made it there within the time set, so you lose points for the obstacle? The answer to that is basically yes. So if we're supposed to be out at this location at 3 o'clock, at 3 hours, and you were out here, you had gone out here, and instead of doing the trail you were supposed to, you decided to go do the open loop, and you get way out here and you realize, oh man, I went the wrong way, and so you come charging back, but you don't get out here till 3:30. The P&R team is going to be waiting for you, but if there were any judges there, they've probably left. They have other places they have to get. So in that regard, you're not going to get a time penalty for being late, but you're very light, but you may get a penalty deduction because you missed an obstacle. For the ride managers and the judges and the trail master, it's a logistical challenge to make sure is to move the judges around to key locations on the trail. Usually they're somewhat limited, and they need to make sure that those judges are where they need to be at appropriate times to catch all the riders. So if you're riding outside your window, you are certainly exposed to missing an obstacle and being penalized for missing an obstacle. Also note that if you decide that, hey, this ride is at 4 miles an hour and I've got a real excitable horse, I'm just going to gallop for the first hour and we're going to get the first 8 miles done in no time. If you get too far down the trail and you go past a judging obstacle before the judges get there, if you're outside your window, you again can be penalized because you missed the obstacle. At the same time, the judges do have an obligation to be at that obstacle at least 15 minutes ahead of when you're expected to be there. If they get to an obstacle and they're not there on time and they see somebody riding off, that means they have to pick up and go try to chase you down at another location. Unfortunately, there was a protest last year at a ride where basically that's what happened, except the judges didn't see the person go by. The judges were a little late. Somebody went through on time or close enough to on time, and they missed them. They judged everybody else and said, you missed the obstacle. And she said, no, I was there on time. and you weren't. And so it can get a little bit messy in protests and challenges, but really try to stay within your ride window. If you do, you won't lose points. If you do, ride management can keep track of where you are and where all the riders are. It's always, if you're a ride manager or trail master and you're standing at a location and all the riders have come through but two, and you're at the end of the time window, it starts to become very stressful because it's like, are these people lost? Are they injured? Where are they? And it's often you have to move on because you have to deal with everybody else. But at the same time, you're trying to figure out where are my riders? Are they safe? If you've just missed a turn, great, and you're running late, that's what we want to hear. But too often I've also had the case where the rider's lost and they don't know they're lost, and we have to go off and try to track them down. Sorry, long-winded answer to a short question. Next question, and likewise, if you're going too fast at the beginning, I just answered that one. If you come to the end of the trail outside of the window too late, do you get time penalty points and can you be disqualified? Yes. So at the bottom of your map, it will tell you what your ride window is. For this particular ride, you're supposed to finish at a ride time of 6 hours and 15 minutes. Sorry, at 6 hours and 35 minutes, which means you can arrive there as early as 6:20 and as late as 5:50. This late number is a little bit fudgeable in that if you had been doing obstacles during the day and you get held up, and say you have, during the day, you were riding at the back of the window and you kept bumping into people who were doing trail challenges, and essentially you were held up for 20 minutes during the ride. You can add your 20 minutes to the end of the window. You do not need to add the 20 minutes to the beginning of the window. So you can always, as long as you don't arrive before this minimum time, you'll be good. If you do arrive early, say you arrive at 6:15, 5 minutes early, your horse is going to get penalized 5 points, and probably you as the rider. The rules are a little bit, it's up to the judge at this point, but usually the rider will also be would be penalized those same 5 points. If you arrive late, say if you arrive at 7 hours in this case, but you have 12 minutes of hold, really you didn't have to arrive until 7:02, so you're good, you're on time, you've had a good day, whether you you finished on time just like the guy who finished at 6:21. If on the other hand you arrive say at 7:10, you still only had the 12 minutes of holds, that means you arrived 8 minutes late, you're going to get 8 penalty points, your horse is, and you as the rider may receive that many penalty points as well. You can be disqualified, and the disqualification point is if you finish 30 minutes outside of your window. So if you had a 10-minute hold in this case, you'd have been allowed to arrive at 7 hours. If you arrive at 7 hours and 31 minutes or later, you will get completion miles for the ride, but you will be disqualified from the competition. That means that you still get credit for the miles that you rode during the day for your lifetime mileage, but you will not be eligible for placings that weekend. I hope that answered your question. Okay. As I said, it's putting this map together the night before helps me get a feel for what the ride is going to look like the next day, where I may need to move out, where I can slow down, that kind of thing. I can also look for, are there any odd timing errors? Do the distances look wrong? I bring that up. People are getting, maps are getting better and better. We're using GPSs, which makes it harder for us to mess up the mileages. We're using programs to calculate these timing tables. These timing tables are miserable to create, and if there's a change, it's really easy to make a math error. So it behooves the rider to kind of take a peek at these beforehand, and if possible, before you actually time out on the ride, is to, if you do notice that something is amiss, to talk to the ride manager, talk to the trail master, and they may be able to do a correction before the ride starts. It's a lot easier to do a correction before the ride starts than once people are heading down the trail. The other reason I do all this writing on the trail, on the map, is because I wear glasses, and looking at this timing table on a map when I'm bouncing down the trail, this is pretty small print and it's hard for me to see. So I like writing things on the map, because when I'm writing down the trail, or I come to an intersection, I can just grab my map, look at it, and in 10 seconds I can say, if I'm at point A, I can say, oh, I was supposed to, this should be about 3.9 miles and I should be here at about 1 hour, and I can check my watch, check my GPS, and see how well I'm doing. This next slide, this is my wife, and right here is our map case. Carrying it, you can carry a map a lot of different ways. You can fold it up, put it in your pocket. Whatever you do, it should be real easy to get to. These are some of the map cases. I don't use this one in particular. I just wanted to show, I just grabbed this because it's clear plastic. You can tie it to your horse. It's really easy to look at. My wife and I, when we come to an intersection or when we're riding down the trail, we can just reach down. This is tied to our GPS and to our pommel, and it's always there. And as we're trotting down the trail, we can grab the map, look at it, and we can go back and say, if we're in this section, if I'm in this section here, and I know, look at my GPS and I'm about 7 miles, I can say, okay, the next timing point's a mile away and I need to be there at 2:20. And if it's now 2:05, I have a mile to go. I'm averaging 4 miles an hour. 4 miles an hour takes about 15 minutes. I'm rattling some of these numbers off really quickly, but it's just kind of how my brain works when we're out in trail. It tells me that I'm doing well on time. If on the other hand, if I know I'm in the middle of this section here, I know my next timing point is at 8.1 miles and I need to be there at 2:20, and the time is currently 2:20, for example, and it's like, oh, I was supposed to be there now, and how far away am I from there? That tells me I'm running behind. If I've been on this section for some period of time, may not be a big deal, it may just be around the corner. If I just went past X and it's at 2:20, I know I've got some time to make up and I need to get moving. I'll talk about that in a little bit. Mentioned carrying the map. A lot of people like to fold them up, put them in their pocket. Just make sure it's really easy. The reason I say this is, and it happens far too often, is people will come up to an intersection and they will see ribbons running off to the left and they'll see ribbons running off to the right, and they just know in their head they're supposed to go off to the left. And they go off to the left. Had they stopped and taken the 10 seconds and looked at their map, it would say, no, you're going to the right today. And I've even seen this when there's a sign there with an arrow saying, go to the right. People just kind of, sometimes they're chatting, paying attention to other things. They see the ribbon and they just follow the ribbon down the wrong trail. If your map is very convenient and you can pull it out and stop, saves you a lot of time. It may take you 10 or 20 or 30 seconds to look at the map, figure out where you're at, and figure out whether I'm supposed to go left or if I'm supposed to go right or straight or whatever. That's a lot better than winding up a mile down the trail and then having to come back and then realizing you've made a mistake. Because if you walk down the trail for a mile, that probably took you about 15 minutes. It would have taken you 15 minutes at 4 miles an hour. Then you have to backtrack all that distance and then continue off where you were supposed to be going. So in theory, by that point in time, if you hustled, at best, you're probably 22 minutes behind where you were supposed to be when you got to that point the first time, if you had made a 1 mile wrong turn. And this kind of thing, it happens all the time. And that's kind of why we're talking about having this little discussion today, is kind of tips and tricks on how to stay on trail on time. The big trick of staying on trail is carrying your map somewhere easy, somewhere where you can look at it. And anytime you come to an intersection, if in doubt, or even if you're not in doubt, is pull the map out, look at it for 10 seconds, and then confirm what you're supposed to be doing and move on. Okay, so now I'm going to get into it's so I'm going to stop here at the moment. I've talked a lot about, I've kind of done two things so far. I talked about a lot of what's on the map, what a lot of the detail of what's on the map, the different components of the map. Are there any questions about what's on the map and how you interpret any of this? Okay. So we will move on. So staying on trail, on the right trail at the right time. I like to say the right trail because, as I say, if you go left and you're supposed to go right, you're technically on today's trail. You're just not there when you're supposed to be, and you're going the wrong direction. So I kind of had these slides a little bit out of order. I should have put my wife's picture next, but we'll deal with where it is. So as I say, carrying a map on you isn't enough. You need to take the time to look at it during the ride, and you should be looking at it often. It's my wife and I, we're always pulling it out, whether we're coming up to an intersection or whether we're partway down the trail and we're saying, when are we supposed to be at the next timing point? Roughly how far away is that? My wife and I also carry GPSs, which gives us the added advantage that if we're between timing points and if we've been paying attention to the mileage, we'll know roughly how far we are between two timing points, and then we can do the math in our head and say, okay, it's about a mile and a half to the next timing point. We have so many minutes to get there, and then we can do some basic math in our head and say, how are we doing on time? Again, the map is used there to say, are you on the trail? Are you on the right trail? Are you going the right direction? With the map, given that you know where you were supposed to be at these different timing points, you can say, am I on time? You should know that you're between, say, points A and point B, for example. And then you can look at your time, and then you can look at your watch, and does all of this match up? Does all of this match up? Are you pacing reasonably well? And I'll address this pacing issue here in just a moment. I can kind of get through this list. Other things once you're out on the trail to pay attention to is like how long is it until the next timing point or the P&R? You might be asking questions of how fast can I go? A lot of riders like to ride at the front of the window, and so you don't want to get ahead of time, but you do want to get to the front of your window. There are some advantages to this where I'll get to in a little bit. Basically, if you're at the front of the window, one, your horse might like going faster, or you might like going faster, and it gives you a chance to just have a little bit more fun. The other thing of going faster is that if something goes wrong during the day and you're at the front of the window, it gives you time to deal with it and not fall behind. Other issues, some people take kind of the opposite approach, and it's like, how fast do I really have to go through this section? And it could be that you know that there's a P&R at the top of a hill coming up, and your horse may not be in the best shape, and so you want to make sure that you want to go up that hill slower than maybe is actually suggested. And so it's like, how slow can I go up that hill and still be on time? And so different things to think about. I've kind of covered this already. This is pulling out your map. When you come to an intersection, what should you do? You have ribbons going both ways. Take the 15 seconds. Look at your map. comment about this is to look at your map. A lot of people in the sport, unfortunately, I figure about half the people are pretty directionally challenged. I'm pausing. I just saw a question come up. Okay, question went away. A lot of people, I figure about half the people riding are somewhat directionally challenged. If you ask them where north is, they have a challenge with that. When you're using a map, I'm going to I have a figure coming up, so I'll get to that in just a minute. You don't. It's when you have the map, you don't necessarily need to know where north is to use the map. All you really need to know is where you've been coming from and where you're going or where you are, and then you can figure out whether you need to go right, left, straight, that kind of thing. As I mentioned, I guess got a text. I'm sorry, I got distracted. Sometimes Sarah texts me to pay attention to something else. I have a question coming up. I'm going to get through this page and then I'll answer the question. Making the wrong turn, as I said, making a wrong turn can easily cost you 5, 10, 15 minutes or longer. I know one story of a friend who was riding with actually the trail master for the ride, and they went 3 miles off trail, and then they had to make all that up. And it was open, and so they were going fast to begin with, and then they had to make up the 3 miles out that they were wrong, come back the 3 miles. They made it in on time, but they did a lot of cantering and some galloping, as I recall. It really pays to pay attention and look at your map. Word of warning here, GPSs don't necessarily help you here. GPSs will show you what the track is, but they usually will not, at least how we use them in this sport, they won't tell you whether to go right or left. They'll say there's a trail off to the right, and they'll say there's a trail off to the left, but it's up to you to know which way you're supposed to be going at this point in time. Let's see, question, Bill, on your maps for your rides, do you base your times to points on minimum and mid ride times, i.e. 4 miles an hour, or minimum, or I'll assume max time? Times on a map will always be the mid times. That would be, will always be the mid times. And so I'll use this map for an example. Let's see, here is camp here, and this kind of goes along with my example a little bit, but here's camp here, and we were heading out of camp in this direction at 4.4 miles an hour, and the mid time to arrive at this point G here is 35 minutes. And this gets a little bit into the logic of using a ride, of how you want to ride. Personally, I like to ride at the front of my window, and the reason I like to do that is I ride with boots, and I'm constantly throwing a boot off, and sometimes I have to go back and find it, and stuff just happens. And just from a psychological point of view, I'm much more comfortable riding when I'm 15 minutes ahead of the window, because I know I have a buffer, than if I'm 10 minutes behind the window. If I'm 10 minutes behind the window, hey, I'm still on time, everything's good, but that fudge fact, that buffer behind me just starts to make me nervous, and it stresses me out. And if I'm 10 minutes ahead all day versus 10 minutes behind all day, I may be basically doing the same pace in both rides all day, but one, I'm having a great time, and the other, I'm stressed out. Time on map is most usually mid-time, yes. But there are times when at briefing, it will be stated that times might be min times or max times if conditions required the change. That may be true. There are 6 different regions in NATRC, and we have every year we have about 40 different rides. So we have roughly 40 different ride managers and trail masters. and they may all do things a little bit differently. Whenever I do a map, I always print the mid time. I will always print the mid time. But at briefing, a trail master is certainly allowed to say, this is a minimum time, this is a maximum time. What I've seen more often happen is on the maps, they will always tell you what the mid time is. But what they will say is, because we're having trouble moving judges around, it is very important that you stay within your window. That you stay within your window, because to move judges around to get to the next obstacle, we are going to be leaving on time. We're not going to be there any earlier than we have to be, so don't ride ahead. We're going to have to leave as soon as we can, so don't fall behind just because you went to lollygag and chat and think that I'll just make it up later in the day. So I do see some of that, but so as kind of the good rule of thumb is, the best you can, right in your window. If you make a wrong turn, then do the best you can and make up the time, but do your best. If you have holds, do not try. You don't have to make up a hold. If they say the min time, we'll pick a point further down the trail here. Our mid time is this location here is 4:41. This is late in the day. Our min time, therefore, would be 15 minutes less than that, which would be, or actually our max time is what we're really interested in. Is the latest printed time you could be here would be at 4:56. But if the judges have been holding you up earlier in the day and you have a 15 minutes of hold, you can add 15 minutes to that max. So essentially you can be 30 minutes past this, which would be out at 5:11, and that's perfectly acceptable, and the judges have to honor that. At the same time, if you show up there 32 minutes late and they said, honor your minimum, they may very likely have left. One exception is P&R hold times. Yes. These are what a P&R hold time is. These are mandatory adjustment times for both min and max time, and you are not allowed to make up a P&R hold time. So what this means is, if you, let me find a P&R out here. That's my second P&R for open. So I've been out here, I'm just trying to find a good example. So it's a hot day, I've been riding open, and my horse isn't feeling 100%. And I've had these days where my horse is just dragging. I come into this P&R, I'm supposed to be there at 4:42. I come in near the back of my window, it's call it 4:55. I'm still barely in my window. But I made it. I do the pulse and respiration, and my horse gets an 18. Anything higher than a 12, you're going to start getting points for. The veterinary judge at the briefing the previous evening is going to say something like, go on 16, hold on 17. And what that means is, when they do your pulse and respiration, in a period of 15 seconds, they're going to be counting heartbeats. And anything under 12 heartbeats in 15 seconds is considered acceptable, and you're not going to get dinged any points. Anything higher than that, you're going to start picking up points. If I get, as I said, a heartbeat of 18 or a respiration of 18 for that matter, my horse is going to be held for 10 minutes. I've been pushing my horse too hard. It's not reacting well. In 10 minutes, if it were fit and healthy, it should have recovered. And apparently it hasn't. If we wait another 10 minutes and my horse's pulse comes and drops below the hold of go on 16, hold on 17, say it comes back down to 13 after another 10 minutes, I say a little bit of a hallelujah, and I can continue on the ride. On the other hand, and I'll get to the point of the question here in a moment, on the other hand is if I get held for the extra 10 minutes and my horse is still up at 18, they're going to hold me for another 10 minutes. And if my horse is still like above 17 or 18, they give me 2 shots after the first P&R to get it right. And if the horse isn't coming down, they're saying something seriously wrong. We're going to pull you from the ride at that point. Everybody hates doing that, but at that, if your horse can't recover in half an hour, something's wrong, and it's time to take care of the horse, and the competition doesn't matter at that point. That said, say I was held for 10 minutes and my horse recovers down, it was just whatever, and it calms down and we get down to a 13, I can continue riding off. What the question commented is that I have now been given an extra 10 minutes of ride time, been told to take an extra 10 minutes of ride time. On this particular ride, the minimum time I can arrive is printed at 5:45, close enough. Because I have been given a 10-minute hold at a P&R, while that says 5:45, I am no longer allowed to arrive there at that point in time. The soonest I can arrive is 5:55 now, 10 minutes later. At the same time, my end time that was 6:15 has now been extended to 6:25. We do not want you, if your horse could not get a decent P&R, we do not want you making up that time. Therefore, the whole window shifts. I hope I answered that question. I hope everybody understood my explanation. Okay. Coming back to this slide, trying to undivert slightly. I am taking longer on this talk than I expected. I'm rambling more. I apologize. We'll start to move through these. On this example, again, it's reading the map, paying attention. When you come into this map, and here's an example of where you don't need to know where north is on the map. You pull out the map. You see that, oh, I know I've been coming from camp. I know I'm at G. I know I'm supposed to go this direction. And so I can just look at the map and say, I've been coming down here. And so do I go left or do I go right? And this map tells me I need to take a right. I don't need to know where north is to know that I need to take a right, essentially. We will scoot on. I apologize for taking so long here. Staying on time, on pace. Pacing your horse is something that you're going to learn through time. If you have a GPS where you can monitor the speed, that will help you. You will learn at different gates, whether you're going 3 miles an hour, 4 miles an hour, 5 miles an hour. Open tends to target 4 to 6 miles an hour. Novice is in the 3.5 to 5 mile an hour range. I know that my Tennessee walking horse, she just walks at 4.5 to 5.5 miles an hour. Something I've learned. I know other horses that walk at 2.5 miles an hour. In novice CP, I can walk an entire ride, and my horses, and I walk the entire ride. I don't have to trot at all if I don't want to. Other horses, if you're walking at 2.5 and the average pace is 4, you're going to have to be doing some trotting, and with time you'll start to get a feel for how that balances out. At your first ride, you're not going to really know, and you're going to have to kind of get a feel for it. It's why I like to have more timing points on a ride, is so when you come into a checkpoint, particularly if you're new at this, is if you knew you needed to be there at 1 o'clock, at 1 hour, and you arrive at 55 minutes, that means that you're riding a little bit slow, and so you need to pick up the pace a little bit. On the other hand, if you came in at 1:05, Sorry, I think I got that backwards. If you come in at 55 minutes, that means you are writing a little faster than you need to be. You're only 5 minutes ahead of your window. You can be 15 minutes ahead. So you don't really have to change anything, but you can if you feel like you're pressing your horse, and you can slow down a little bit. On the other hand, if you come in at 105 or 110, it means you're running behind. Start to pick up the pace a little bit. This is kind of, how do you know how you're doing? At every checkpoint, check your time, and if you have a GPS, check your mileage. Often you're riding in a group of 2 or 3 or maybe 4 people, and sometimes it's easy to get into the habit of letting the lead person kind of pay attention to all this stuff. Every person in that group is responsible for their own time, and so every time you come up to an intersection, out of habit, you should check your time and your distance if possible, and then compare it to the map. When my wife and I read, we also do a little bit of teamwork. If I'm out in front, my job is to keep us on trail, and since she doesn't have to be looking for ribbons, she's often the one looking at the map and saying, okay, we have half a mile to go and we have 7 minutes to get there. She's looking at the watch and she's looking at the GPS distance. And so I'm keeping us on trail, she's keeping us on time. Still, it's my job when I come up to that intersection to stop, check my time, check my distance, move along. Other things that kind of go along with this are, if you're moving along, everything seems great, and you've been going along fine all day, and then all of a sudden your GPS says you were expecting to be somewhere, say at 17 miles, and a timing point is supposed to be at 17 miles, but your GPS now says, and it's been tracking well all day, all of a sudden it says you're at 16 miles. There's been a 1 mile, there's a discrepancy between your map and your GPS by a significant amount. This changed. This happens, people make mistakes on maps. Often you will, at the same time you see this, is all of a sudden you'll arrive at a timing point 15 minutes early or 15 minutes late. That's not necessarily something to panic about. If all of a sudden you arrive at a point, you've been riding on time all day, and all of a sudden you're 15 minutes early, it probably means that there's been a mistake on the map. I would be very hesitant to say, okay, we can slow down now. I've seen where sometimes I would at least ride to the next timing point before I made a decision to slow down, because I've seen where you have like 3 miles between A and B and another 3 miles between B and C for a total of 6 miles. And somehow on the map, instead of being 3 and 3, it got labeled as 2 and 4. And so they made a mistake in marking up the map, but the overall distance is right. The overall distance between those 2 points is, the overall distance and time is good. And so if you see the big jumps, pay attention to them, tell the ride manager or trail master when you see them, but just kind of keep riding your own ride, because if you gain or lose time in a certain period, it may be made up again at a later time. I know that's a little confusing, but as soon as it actually happens to you, it will make sense. It's always very disconcerting when everything is going great and all of a sudden you're 15 minutes behind. And then you ride a little bit more and then you're back on time and you kind of wonder how it happened. Diversion, apologize. Things to keep in mind, some basic math, is if you're going 4 miles an hour, that takes you 15 minutes to go 1 mile. If you're going 6 miles an hour as an open rider, you do 1 mile in 10 minutes. So if you're a novice rider and you find yourself 5 minutes behind, 5 minutes behind at a particular location, that tells me that you're about 1/3 of a mile behind where you're supposed to be. Not a huge distance, but if you pick up the pace a little bit, it's not something insurmountable to make up. I'm just seeing how far I have to go. Okay, I am going to try to pick up the pace here. I apologize. Some different logic on where people like to ride. I alluded to this a little bit earlier. Some people like to ride at the front of the window versus the back of the window. Some of this is comfort. Some of this is comfort for you. Some of it is comfort for your horse. A lot of horses just like to take off in the morning, and it's often better just to kind of let them go, let them get some of their energy out, and it doesn't hurt to get a little bit ahead. I'm not going to go through the math there. So some people like to blast out, get ahead 15 minutes, say in the first 4 miles. Here I go through a little bit of math, and I apologize because of the time, but this is the kind of thing that's going through my head when I'm riding. If I want to get ahead, if I really want to blast out and get 15 minutes ahead in, say, the first 4 miles, it's how fast do I have to go? So essentially, instead of doing 4 miles an hour, at 4 miles an hour, I have to do 4 miles in 45 minutes. That gets me there 15 minutes ahead. And I need to average about 5.5 miles an hour. At the same time, if I get to the head of my window, I have to do the rest of the ride at the average pace or a little bit less. Otherwise, I'm going to get ahead and outside my window. This isn't necessarily bad, and I can actually ride faster than 4 miles an hour. But what it means is I build up my buffer, but it gives me time to stop, to have my horse eat grass, to enjoy the view, drink water. I like to do this because, personally, my horse, she won't eat if we're going down the trail. And often the only way for me to get my horse to eat is to dismount. And when I dismount, she says, "Oh, I can eat now." She gets really amped up. And if I'm sitting on her back, sometimes she just won't eat. But as soon as I get off the horse, she will eat. So if I'm riding at the front of the window, I can get away with this. Also, if I'm coming up to a P&R, a mile from the P&R, if my horse is kind of running a little ragged, or even if not, and I'm 15 minutes ahead, I can just mosey into the P&R. Instead of having her cool down for 10 minutes at the P&R, I can essentially have her cool down on the way up to the P&R. Other people like to mosey out. They don't mind being 5 or 10 minutes behind, 10 miles out. Here's some other math is if you were going to ride 10 miles an hour and a half, 4 miles an hour would take you 2.5 hours. You can see that if you give yourself an extra 15 minutes, you can slow down. It gives you time to enjoy the ride. All those guys who want to race ahead, they're welcome to race ahead and do that kind of thing. At the same time, you need to complete the remainder of the ride at the average of 4 miles an hour. You're going to drop out the back end of your window. So this kind of may mean you have to ride the second half of the ride faster than the first half of the ride. Some people, my wife kind of likes to do this as kind of a hybrid, is where she likes to get out in front early. It's cool. Her horse has a lot of energy, and she builds up a buffer. But as the day, and so we'll blast out. We kind of middle of the day, we ride an average pace. And then for the last 4 miles of the ride, she looks down at her watch and says, instead of an hour to get back into camp, if we've been riding in the front of the window, she says, I've got an hour and a half to get back into camp. If we're 15 minutes ahead, we don't have to finish until 15 minutes behind. She won't cut it that close, but it gives you can see that instead of going 4 miles an hour into camp, for 4 miles in an hour and a half, we can slow down to basically about 3 miles an hour. And she can just mosey into camp. Her horse cools down. We always like to walk our horses into camp, the last mile into camp anyway. prevents them teaching bad habits, all sorts of different ways and logic to do a ride. I've been throwing a lot of math out there for time, distance, speed. NATRC has this nice little table at this website here where you can convert speed to distance and how many minutes it's going to take you. So if I'm going 4 miles an hour and I need to go 9 miles, it's going to take me this 127 minutes. And so this is nice for filling out your timing tables, or if you happen to carry it, to do some rough math out on the trail. Let's see. I am running really late. I apologize to everybody. How far is it to the next timing point? It helps to know roughly what time you were at the last timing point. Let's see, what the last time, oh, sorry, know what the last timing point is. You always should know what the last timing point was. When you were at the last timing point and what pace you were kind of setting. So in this case, if we're going from point B to point A, this is how my brain kind of works, is if I had left point B 45 minutes ago, I know by looking at the map that the distance between point B and point A, let's see, point A is at 23.2 miles, point B was at 18.7 miles. That's 4.5 miles in between these. If I left there about 45 minutes ago, I'm somewhere along this squiggly line. If I've been averaging 4 to 5 miles an hour, it should take me about an hour to do this 4.5 miles. I happen to pick this example and happen to be 4.5 miles in an hour, which is kind of convenient. So the whole distance to go this 4.5 miles should take me an hour. If I'm 45 minutes out, I have 15 minutes still to get to A, which means I'd have just a little bit over a mile. So these are the kind of numbers I'm doing out on the trail. How long have I been away from a timing point? So if this is a PNR, if it's the 2 mile, if it's camp, I can kind of judge when I'm getting back into camp. Here's I'm starting to look at how things go wrong and how you deal with it. And when things go wrong, it makes a difference on where they go wrong. This would be a big error, and I kind of talked about making a wrong turn by a mile, but assume that we're out on a 20-mile ride, you're 10 miles out, you come up to a point and you take a left when you should have taken a right. But you take your left and it takes you a mile to get down the trail, and then before you realize that you've made a mistake. How big a deal is this? You just realized I have to do an extra 2 miles of riding. I've already done one of it. But the first thing to notice is if you arrived here at your mid time at 2:30 and you're going your pace, it's now 2:45 and you're a mile away. Note that's the max time that you should have gone through that timing point. So if there's a judge waiting right here, you potentially are in trouble. At the same time, they probably aren't right there, and you may have time to get back. First, you have a mile to make back up to get back to this timing point. But other things to consider is in the ride, your maximum ride time is going to be, I'm ignoring PNRs at this point in time, your maximum ride time is going to be about 5 hours and 15 minutes. And after you've made a big mistake, stop thinking about mid time and min time and start thinking about max time. When do I have to be there? This means that you still have 2.5 hours to go 11 miles instead of the 2 hours that you had planned on taking to go this. This means that you have 2.5 hours to go 11 miles instead of kind of the planned 2.5 hours to go 10 miles. Do you need to panic? It's kind of yes and no. You're going to need to average 4.5 miles an hour to get back into camp. It's not really slow, and it's not walking, but you don't really have to do you don't have to do a lot of cantering. Your real problem is, as I alluded to, is if there's a judge just a little ways down the trail and they don't have any hold times to keep them around, it's possible you will miss the judge. So it's when you realize you make the mistake here, you have to decide if there's a P&R just down here a little ways, maybe you don't want to canter into the P&R. Maybe you'll risk missing the judge and just do kind of a nice easy trot until you get along. If you've just passed a P&R, maybe this is a good time to canter and catch back up quickly. The same error, same 1 mile error, but worse timing, and I've seen this happen, is where at the 2 mile marker, instead of taking the turn towards camp, they turn the opposite way and head on out. And this becomes much worse, is by the time, if you're a mile down the trail, if you were at mid-time at say 4:30, all of a sudden you're supposed to be back in camp between 4:45 and 5:15. It's now 4:45 and you're 3 miles away from camp. This means you have 30 minutes to get back into camp. That's not undoable. It's 3 miles. That means you're going to be, instead of riding at 4 miles an hour, you have to ride at 6 miles an hour. This is an easy trot, but it's for a long distance, and you or your horse may not be in condition for that. As long as the trail conditions are decent, this is not too bad. Hopefully you won't see a judge between here and there, because if they stop you for an obstacle, that's going to make things even worse. If they stop you for 5 minutes at the 2 mile that you can't claim a hold for, then the last 2 miles you're going to be having to do 8 miles an hour to get back into camp. I alluded to some things about P&Rs. I'm going to stop this here soon. I apologize. If I'm coming up to a P&R, this is a pacing issue, and knowing your horse. Some horses, particularly open horses, often do better trotting into a P&R. They're in good shape, they cool down well. If you try to hold them back, they get anxious and excited, and you may actually make things worse by slowing them down coming into a P&R. On the other hand, if you're new to NATRC, your horse probably isn't in that great of condition, and if you know that he tends to run high on the P&Rs, sometimes it's good to slow your ride down, take an extra 5 minutes to mosey into the P&R to get your horse cooled down, to get the pulse as low as possible. And then after the P&R, pick up a slow trot after the P&R and make up those 5 minutes. Often if I'm running behind, even if I'm 5 or 10 minutes or even 15 minutes behind coming into a P&R because for whatever reason I'm running late, I still will not pick up the pace to go into a P&R, and I'll often even lose a few more minutes going into the P&R because I don't want to lose the points at the P&R stop. And usually I know that afterwards I can pick up the pace a little bit and still do just fine. I also know it in Region 3 rides, usually the last 2 miles is at a maximum of 4 miles an hour. It's usually on easy trail. And so I know usually in the last 2 miles, if I really need to make up some time, I can do that. And so it's kind of knowing a little bit about the trail. Anyway, I think people get the point, and I'm rambling a little bit. GPSs, again, these are where GPSs are nice, is they tell you that you're on trail. They may not tell you that you're necessarily in the right part of the trail, but they will tell you that you are on trail. If you're confused about where you are, this is a GPS track here, and this is a little track I made around the house, and they can help you locate where you are if you get confused, if you've been chatting with people. And so if you take the big picture point view of things, you can say, okay, here's a pattern of trail. How does that match up on the map? And if I look here, it's like, oh, I have a couple narrow lines, I have a big loop over here. that tells me I'm about here on the map and I can position myself. That's where GPSs are really nice. They also help you how long you've been out on the trail, how many miles have you gone. I'm going to scoot past that. I was going to talk a little bit about group size. I talk about group size from a pacing point of view, in that the more people that you ride with, the harder it is to maintain your pace. When I ride open, I really dislike riding with more than one other person. Sometimes I will ride with two. In novice, I don't like to ride with more than two other people, 3 if I have to. The reason is, if you come to a trail challenge, particularly if you're the person who's leading, it's you go through the trail challenge, and then you need to wait for the next person to come through, and each person you're riding with, you need to wait for them to come through. But if you're the lead person, you do not get any hold time. They may get some hold times, but you do not. And so the more of you that are in the group, you're going 0 pace and the time is ticking by. And you want to try to avoid that. The quick example of this is, if each of you do the obstacle, and there are 4 of you and it each takes you 1 minute to do the obstacle, at least for the lead rider, you've given up 3 minutes of ride time, which has cost you about 1/5 of a mile. In open, it's even worse, and that's distance you need to make up. And if you've been having a hard time staying on pace, this just makes it more difficult. On the flip side of this is, it can help if you do ride in a group, if you take turns going first, if you kind of rotate who goes through the obstacles first, because then different people are not getting the hold time and other people might be getting some hold time. Last slide. Judges will commonly ask you where you are on the map or where north is. This is one reason you want to pay attention to the map, looking at it. If you're always paying attention, you always have a pretty good idea where you are. The trick is, if they ask you where north is and you're directionally challenged, you can still use your map to figure it out. In this example, say you knew that you would just come from D and you're riding to H, and a judge stops you out here in the middle somewhere. You can pull out the map. You know that north is to the top of the map. You can look down at the ground and see where the trail is. And pretty much on most of this trail, north is to the left. And so when the judge says, where's north? You can just say off to the left somewhere. And even if you're in kind of this bumpy area, with a little bit of luck, you'll be close enough to keep the judge happy. If they ask you to point east or west, know that the sun rises in the east and sets in the west, and you can kind of figure that out. Unfortunately, a lot of people, they get in a hurry and they forget that minor little that, as silly as it sounds, people get a little flustered and they forget that little rule. Anyway, let's see, if you're unsure. For me, they always kind of laugh at me when they pull out, because I'm kind of the map guy. I'm not allowed to get this wrong or I'll always be made fun of. But if you're ever in doubt, they're not in a major hurry. Always, if you're in any doubt, pull out your map, look at it, think about where you just came from, where you're going, and you should be able to answer that question fairly easily. That's all I had. I only ran 25 minutes longer than I expected. I apologize. Are there any questions? I'm not seeing any questions. I hope this was useful for people. It rambled a little bit more than I intended, but I hope it was useful. I will stop there unless we have questions. Again, if you do have questions you don't want out, you can, these are my 2 email addresses. Please feel free to contact me.
Thank you.
Oh, any advice for maps on a rainy day? Yes. This is why I carry cases like that. If my camera is still working, bring it up. This is a map case I got from REI. I think it's about $10. There are a couple things I don't like about this, as it's a little bit flimsy and the map kind of folds up during the day. If I just put in a single map, and here are about 10 different maps, or you could use a piece of cardboard and I wrap the map around it and put that in here, and it's you can read through it. It's becomes very stiff and stable through this hoop here. I tie it on my GPS lanyard, and I can pull it up, and I don't care if it's raining or not. People use Ziploc bags as well, but I've been using this now for about 3 years. My previous map case I bought when I was 20 years old. I'm now 58 years old, so I got 25 years out of my previous map case. It was a little bit better made than this one, but I find them worth the investment. Any other questions? All right, I think we're done. I hope this was useful. I don't get a lot of feedback because I'm just staring at a computer screen, but thank you for attending. And we will be having another in our webinar series on setting up your horse trailers. I think we're still trying to nail down the date, but Sally Kudra will be doing that and giving examples and telling you how to do that. Thank you very much.